In the twilight of the 12th century, Europe was changing. Kingdoms rose and fell with bloodshed, the plague loomed at the edges of every breath, and the Church, ancient, powerful, and unyielding, sat at the very heart of it all. But beneath the soaring cathedrals and solemn prayers, a storm was brewing. In southern France, a quiet rebellion had begun to take root, not one of swords and sieges, but of thought. The Cathars, a group of Christians who dared to challenge the authority of the Catholic Church. They rejected its opulence, condemned its corruption, and most dangerously, they claimed to speak the true word of God. To the common folk, the Cathars were holy, pure, uncorrupted by Rome's gold. To the Church, they were heretics, threats, enemies of the divine order. And so, with whispers of dissent growing louder, the Church responded. Not with mercy, not with understanding, but with a new weapon, sharper than any sword, colder than any cell. They called it the Inquisition. It began in 1184, when Pope Lucius III issued the papal bull Ad Abolendum, an order that would change the course of history. It empowered bishops across Christendom to seek out heretics, to question them, and to purge them in the name of salvation. At first it seemed simple, questioning, preaching, persuading lost souls back into the fold. But as the years went by, and heresy proved harder to kill, the Inquisition changed. It hardened. Because what happens when mercy fails? When heretics won't repent? When truth becomes inconvenient? You create a system to break them. By the early 1200s, the Inquisition had taken root in Languedoc, where the Cathars held sway. It was no longer a matter of simple theology. It had become war. Pope Innocent III, enraged by the defiance, declared a crusade, not against foreign lands, but against his own people. The Albigensian Crusade. Villages were razed, women and children slaughtered, and entire communities wiped out in the name of spiritual purity. Tens of thousands died. And in the smoldering ashes of that campaign, the true Inquisition was born. It would no longer be left to local bishops, it would become institutionalized, centralized, ruthless. By the 1230s, Pope Gregory IX formally established the Papal Inquisition, appointing special inquisitors, men trained not just in theology, but in interrogation. Men loyal not to kings or countries, but to the Pope alone. Their mission? To root out heresy. Wherever it hid. By whatever means necessary. They came cloaked in black robes, bearing the insignia of the cross, but they did not preach. They questioned. They recorded. They judged. And once a name was written into their ledger, there was little hope of escape. This was not justice, it was procedure. A spiritual machine, cold, clinical, and exacting. Confession became currency, torture became testimony, silence became guilt. The accused were not allowed to know who had spoken against them. No lawyers, no appeal, no hope. Families were shattered, communities turned on each other, suspicion became survival. All in the name of God. This was just the beginning. The Inquisition would grow. It would evolve. It would become a dark pillar of religious history, feared, whispered about, and forever shrouded in secrecy. But here, in these first blood-stained pages, we glimpse its true face, not as a crusade for truth, but as the birth of an empire of fear. And the shadows were just getting started. They arrived without warning. No announcements, no proclamations, just the echo of boots on cobblestone, the flutter of black robes, and the heavy silence that followed. The Inquisitors. To the townspeople, they were both myth and monster. The hand of God cloaked in human form, or so they claimed. They bore no armor, no sword, yet their presence silenced rooms. Families hid behind locked doors, even priests bowed in nervous reverence. Because everyone knew, once the Inquisition entered a village, nothing would be the same again. They carried ledgers, not Bibles. Questions, not sermons, eyes that missed nothing. And always that look, as if they could already see the heresy buried in your soul. They were trained in the art of unmasking lies, not through violence, at least not at first, but through the mastery of psychology. The quiet pause after a question, the way they stared without blinking, the deliberate twist of words meant to corner the mind. These were not ordinary men. They had been selected, forged, and groomed in the deepest chambers of the church, where righteousness was absolute and doubt was a sin. The Dominicans became their primary vessel. Known as the Order of Preachers, they were chosen to lead the charge, their zeal wrapped in unshakable doctrine. Many believed they were incorruptible, holy, chosen. But power, when wrapped in faith, becomes something far more dangerous. Because when you believe you are doing God's work, there are no limits to what you'll justify. Their methods were as varied as they were meticulous. First, the Edict of Faith, a public announcement, often read aloud from the pulpit, declaring that heresy had been discovered in the region. It was not an accusation, it was a warning, a challenge. Over the next 30 days, residents were expected to confess their sins voluntarily. Secret beliefs, forbidden texts, conversations whispered by candlelight. Even if you'd done nothing wrong, the safest path was to step forward and say something. Because failing to confess was seen as prideful, and pride, after all, was a seed of heresy. Those who came forward received penance, fasting, prayer, public humiliation. Those who did. They were questioned, and those who were accused. They were taken. No charges were read aloud, no trial by jury. You were simply removed into the darkness, into the silence of the inquisitorial chamber. Inside, the inquisitor sat across from you in candlelight. Quiet, patient, waiting. The questions began gently, your beliefs, your past, your associations, but always they circled back to the same core demand. Do you confess? If you said yes, your punishment was sealed. If you said no, the questions continued, again and again, until you were frayed like old rope. The inquisitors were not interested in innocence, they sought compliance. Because in their eyes, the very act of being accused was a sign of guilt. After all, why would anyone suspect you if you were pure? In this system, silence became your enemy. Honesty was a trap, and the truth was whatever they chose to believe. But even this cruel theater of questions, was only the beginning. When questioning failed, they turned to the tools. Torture was sanctioned by the church, but never admitted aloud. It was cloaked in euphemism, the question under pressure, the application of persuasion. But behind those words were devices too gruesome to describe, designed with one purpose, to break the human soul without ending the body. The rack, the strappado, the pair of anguish, iron boots filled with burning coals, each designed not for death, but for confession. And when you screamed, they called it cleansing. When you wept, they saw redemption. When you begged for mercy, they offered it in exchange for names. Neighbors, friends, family. The accused became the accusers, and the cycle fed upon itself. But who were the inquisitors really? Some were true believers, zealots who thought they were saving souls from eternal damnation. Others were ambitious men, intoxicated by power and privilege. There were even those who doubted the system, but said nothing, for to question the Inquisition was to risk becoming its next subject. Their reports were detailed, precise, every confession recorded, every sentence catalogued in ink and blood. These records still exist, buried in the Vatican archives, locked behind miles of stone and silence. And what they reveal is chilling. Thousands of trials, countless lives ruined, generations haunted. And yet, the Church called it mercy. Because to them, saving a soul, no matter the suffering, was always worth the price. The Inquisitors did not see themselves as villains. They were instruments, tools of divine justice. But justice, warped by fear, faith, and fanaticism, becomes something else entirely. It becomes tyranny draped in robes. And as their power grew, so too did their reach. New lands, new targets, new enemies of the faith. And soon, the flames of the Inquisition would rise higher than ever before. Not in Rome. Not in France. But in a place where fire became policy. Beneath the gilded chapels and marble sanctuaries, there was another world, one carved from stone and silence. A world where salvation was measured in screams. The torture chambers of the Inquisition were not myth. They were real. purpose-built sanctuaries of agony hidden behind cloisters and churches, where the pious wore black robes and the instruments of God were forged in iron. The rack, used to stretch limbs beyond their limits. The strapado, where victims were hoisted and dropped by the wrists until joints shattered. The iron boot, crushing bones into powder. Waterboarding, a simulation of drowning that baptized you into submission. These were not tools of punishment, they were tools of persuasion, designed to make the innocent confess and the guilty implicate others. No blood could be spilled, according to the Church. That was the only rule, so they learned to break without bleeding, to destroy the mind and body while keeping the flesh intact. Witnesses were rarely allowed. Accusations were often anonymous, and once the pain began, the truth was no longer relevant, only the confession. The Church needed names. Heresy spread like fire, and fear was the accelerant. So they burned one to silence a dozen. And if you survived the questioning, your reward was public humiliation, forced pilgrimage, confiscation of property, or, for the unlucky, the stake. Because though the Church did not kill, it handed you to the state. And the state had no such qualms. In 1478, the Inquisition evolved again, this time into something far more ruthless. Spain was emerging from centuries of war with Muslim rulers. The Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, sought unity, not through tolerance, but through purification. The Spanish Inquisition was born not just as a religious tool, but a political weapon. Its aim: root out false converts, Jews and Muslims who had accepted Christianity under pressure, but continued their old practices in secret. It was no longer about saving souls, it was about control, and suspicion became institutionalized. Neighborhoods turned against each other, servants betrayed masters, children denounced parents. The accused were dragged before autos da fe, public spectacles of penance, pageantry, and execution. Thousands gathered to watch as the condemned were paraded in robes of shame, marched through streets, and tied to stakes. Their crime: believing in the wrong God, or simply knowing the wrong people. Tomás de Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor, became a symbol of merciless orthodoxy. Under his rule, thousands were tortured, hundreds burned. Fear became the fabric of Spanish society. But the fire did not stay within borders, it spread. To Portugal. To the New World. To anyone who refused to kneel. The Inquisition did not just seek heretics in flesh, it sought them in ideas. In 1559, the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the Index of Forbidden Books, was published. A blacklist of knowledge, a decree of ignorance. Works by Galileo, Copernicus, Erasmus, even translations of the Bible. All outlawed. Owning a forbidden book was a sin, printing one, heresy. Books were seized, burned, scholars silenced, printing presses destroyed. Because to control a mind, you must first control what it consumes. The Roman Inquisition, under Cardinal Carafa, made it clear. Knowledge outside doctrine was a threat, and a single dangerous idea could be more fatal than a sword. The Church didn't fear the written word, it feared its power. And so it turned the Inquisition into a thought police, where even curiosity was criminal. Though many associate witch hunts with rural mobs and local hysteria, the Inquisition had its own hand in the madness. In regions like Italy and Spain, it investigated witches, healers, and mystics. Women, especially those who lived alone or practiced herbal medicine, became easy targets. The charge of witchcraft was elastic. It could mean midwifery, dreaming strange dreams, or angering the wrong neighbor. Once accused, few escaped. Though the Inquisition occasionally moderated the worst of witchcraft hysteria seen in Protestant regions, it still tortured women into confessing covenants with the devil. Familiar spirits, flights through the air, all drawn out under pain and pressure. The line between heretic and witch blurred. One challenged church dogma, the other cosmic order. Both had to be erased. Not all went silently, some stood tall in the face of fire. Giordano Bruno, a philosopher who claimed the stars were suns and the universe infinite, was burned in 1600. His ideas threatened the center of church cosmology. He refused to recant. There were others, poets, nuns, thinkers, peasants, their names mostly lost to time, but their defiance echoed across generations. Some were broken, others were canonized, many vanished. And yet the Inquisition survived, quietly adapting, changing names, moving behind the veil. The Inquisition officially ended in 1834 in Spain. The Vatican's Office of the Inquisition was renamed in 1965. Today, it still exists, now called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Same office, different name. In 1998, Pope John Paul II opened some Inquisition records, nearly 100 linear kilometers of shelves. Historians discovered a truth deeper and more unsettling than legends ever told. Meticulously documented trials, family betrayals, state-sponsored fear, and a machine that endured for nearly 700 years. The Church has acknowledged some of its sins, apologies were made, but many files remain sealed, many victims unnamed. The shadow of the Inquisition still lingers. In the fear of dissent. In the censorship of truth. In the idea that power, cloaked in righteousness, is above question. The Inquisition is not just history, it is a warning. A reminder that evil can wear holy robes, that silence can become complicity. That fear, when baptized by authority, can burn brighter than faith itself. And as long as institutions refuse to confront their darkest pasts, we remain vulnerable to the next whisper in the dark.